So we have Miss KrisAnne Hall here. She is a constitutional attorney. She's been featured on Fox News. She's been on PragerU, the Rubin Report. She's awesome, and we're all blessed to have her here and give us her expertise on the Constitution, and specifically what's up with these lockdowns, if they're constitutional, the legality of it. She's going to go through all of it. And yeah, with that,
great.
Thanks for coming, and
thank you.
Blow out of the port.
Thank you, Turning Point UF. Go Gators. Yeah. Woo. So I graduated from the University of Florida College of Law. So we've been Gator fans for quite some times, part of the Gator Nation. My husband went through the psych program, and it's really exciting to be back on campus here and to see everybody that's here. We're going to be talking about today about the Constitution in crisis. Now, let me ask you first, how many of you have ever heard one of my podcasts? All right, great. How many of you just learned that I have a podcast? Yeah. So we are a little bit different than your average podcast. We are not a talk show. We are a teach show. So my husband, those of you here on campus saw my husband. He came in and brought some of our things with us today. My husband and I, we do this show together where we take the current events that you see in the news every day and we bring them to you from a constitutional and principled perspective. So just to give you an idea of how we operate, the tagline for my show is liberty over security, principle over party, and truth over personality. So what you'll get from us is the news without the agenda. Just simply Constitution law. We point out where the politics are happening, when they conflict with the Constitution, when they match with the Constitution, but we are constitutionally oriented. I also want to make sure you understand that what we do is not just simply recite to you constitutional law and talk like a bunch of professors and talk about Supreme Court opinions. I focus on the Constitution as the founders intended it to be applied. The Constitution is not written in Mandarin Chinese, so it doesn't need to be interpreted. It is a contract that needs to be applied. And there really is less controversy in understanding the constitutions when you understand that you should just simply be following contract law, and it's not more than reading the text and understanding the context behind them. I don't know if any of you have heard of this term called hermeneutics, but hermeneutics is how you apply the Constitution, which just simply means not a textual perspective like Antonin Scalia would have done, but textual plus historical plus intent. It's the only way that you can really understand a document that is written outside your time. And if you want a little insight on that, there's a little phrase that we remember. It's called context is king. And so it's not what we want it to say today. It's what those who ratified it meant it to say today. And that's the important aspect of what we're doing here. So these are all the platforms that our podcast is on. We are actually on Spotify. I was named one of Spotify's top growing podcasts of the year, which I thought was pretty cool because Spotify has a lot of groups on there. But our context today is the Constitution in crisis, from maybe an angle that you hadn't thought of before. So those of you in the audience, raise your hand if you have a pocket Constitution. Right? Great. How many of you have a pocket Florida Constitution? That's a little bit different, isn't it? Now, unfortunately, we've kind of messed up our Florida Constitution, so you couldn't really shove it in your pocket. It's way too big. But what we should have is a Florida Constitution that contains Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, Article 4, and Article 5. We could do that. And that's what we're going to go over today, because when we're talking about the pandemic, the real Constitution in crisis today, because of the pandemic, is not the U.S. Constitution. It is our state constitutions. I have traveled all across America. Before COVID, I taught 260, on average, 260 classes in over 22 states every single year. And then when COVID hit, obviously things shut down for a little while, but things are picking up again. I've been on college campuses. I've taught the legislators of 10 states in session. I have taught the sheriffs of 24 states at this point, all about the Constitution and how it's supposed to work. But what we forget is the design of our constitutional republic is a separation of power. A separation of power from the federal government to our state governments. And when we're talking about local actions, the health of the people, the property of the people, the elections of the people, that is where we must turn to our state constitutions. Now, even our US Constitution, as well as our state constitution, all begin with the same fundamental principles. Samuel Adams wrote an essay in 1772 called The Rights of the Colonists. He wrote, among the natural rights of the colonists are these: first, life; secondly, liberty; third, property; together, number 4, with the right to protect and defend them in the best manner they can. He says these are evident branches of, not deductions from, the first law of nature, the duty of self-preservation. You see, this is how we know our governments are built on the fundamental principles of individual liberty. We are individually created, individually endowed with individual rights, to include the individual authority to secure all of our own rights. I am a professor at the River School of Government in Tampa, and I teach these principles in our classes there at the River School of Government, and it's really important to understand how government is formed. So I'm just going to give you a little sneak peek by just looking at our foundational documents. And I hope that you guys will participate with me just a little bit here, because I'm going to throw some questions out at you, but I'm going to promise you one thing. I will never ask you a trick question. Now, here's the crazy thing. Why would I have to tell you that? Because my questions are so simple, you're going to think that they're trick questions. But in reality, they're not. I just want you to see how simple it is to understand these principles so that we are no longer intimidated to actually study them, to look at them, to know them. I believe for 176 years, because I know the date, we stopped teaching our Constitution properly. The date was 1833. And for 176 years, we have been intimidated to know how our governments are supposed to work according to the constitutions. We've been fed a line that you have to be some kind of scholar or some wonk or some Supreme Court justice to understand constitutions. That is simply a lie of intimidation to keep the American people ignorant, uneducated, and uninvolved. Everything that's happening today, with an election crisis, with a health crisis, with an economic crisis, all stems, I believe, from a simple fact that we have been taught to not care. We have been taught to not be involved. And we have been discouraged and told that we are not capable. And that's what I do. That's what we do in everything that we do, is go out of our way to show you that you are all you need to know how this works. So everything begins with natural rights, even from our beginning. Here is the beginning of our Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and endowed by their governor with certain inalienable rights. You're laughing, right? That's not what that says. What's it say? Endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these, I love that phrase, by the way. If you're not a lawyer, maybe it's not as amusing to you. But when you see the phrase among these, what you know is you're about to see a list. But it's not a complete list. It's a short list. But I'm showing you this list because these are the beginning, maybe the most important of that list, but you have to know there's more to come. So he says, among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, the next part is what's really, really important to us. So I'm going to ask you a really important question. The year is 1776. Not a trick question. Is there a federal government July 4th, 1776? No, right? Because we've just kicked off the federal government that we had, which was the British Parliament and the King. So right now, July 4th, 1776, we don't have a federal government, or they call the general government or central government. All we have are what governments? Not yet. The states. On July 2nd, now this was published July 4th. On July 2nd, 1776, by law, the Continental Congress transformed our colonies into independent sovereign states. So on July 4th, 1776, the only governments that exist in our world are the states. So look at what our Declaration of Independence tells us is the duty of our states. That to secure these rights, which rights? The inalienable ones, the ones endowed upon us by our Creator, the ones that begin with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power from the consent of the governed. Now, if we just paused for just a few minutes and looked at the depth of that statement, we would learn so much, right? Number one, what is the duty of our states? Just one, to secure our rights, right? It's the only reason any government ever exists, to secure our rights, especially ours, because we started understanding the principles of government and the rights of the people. So number one, it is the state's obligation and their only duty to exist to secure our rights. But then it goes further and tells us they get their power from us. But what power? The just power that they use is the one that is derived from our consent. And this is what sets us apart from every other place on the globe. We don't have to guess what our consent is. The government doesn't have to, people in government don't have to debate. The Supreme Court doesn't have to tell us. Our consent is in writing, and that's the whole purpose of our constitutions. Our constitutions are our written legal consent to the powers exercised by government. So when we understand, number one, their duty is to secure our rights. Number two, they operate based on our consent. Our consent is our constitution in writing. And that when they operate according to our consent, they are exercising just powers. Well, let's turn that a little bit. Doesn't that sentence also say in the negative that if they are operating outside our consent, that they are now exercising unjust power? Isn't that what that says? So knowing this simple truth, that our consent is the Constitution, just powers are operated according to our consent, then we must know this. Anytime our governments operate outside our Constitution, they are operating with unjust power because they've just violated our consent. So let's look at this real quick. Government, this is James Madison. James Madison is explaining in an essay that he wrote in 1792 called Property. He said, government is established to protect property, not control it. He says, government is instituted to protect property of every sort. This being the end of government, meaning it's the only purpose of government. That alone is a just government, which impartially secures to every man whatever is his own. Now let's just pause there for a second. A just government secures the property of the people. In this essay, you find out that it's not just talking about your house and your cell phone and your car. James Madison explains that your rights are also your property. Your freedom of speech is your property. Your right to peaceably assemble is your property. Your right to keep and bear arms are all forms of property. And he says, a just government impartially secures to every person what is his own. Remember the basis of individual rights. Impartially. Let me ask you guys a question. If the government comes down and says, Walmart and Costco can stay open, but mom and pop have to close, wouldn't that be a violation of the impartial requirement? If Costco and Walmart can stay open, but mom and pop have to close, that is the very exercise of partiality. It's not based on science. It's not based on law. It's not based on reason, because law that is truly law is based on reason. It is completely arbitrary. By the way, it's not following science, because even though, yes, I am an attorney, my undergraduate degree is in biochemistry, and I think you don't need a biochemistry degree to have a little logic and think it's a whole lot easier to keep mom and pop store clean than it is to keep Walmart or Costco clean. Can I get an amen? Right? So what is now the litmus for judging our governments? They must operate by our consent, and they must impartially secure whatever is ours. If they are operating outside of our Constitution, if they're not guarding impartially, then they are an unjust government. Why? Because it's about our rights, not about their power, not about someone's fear, not about someone's desires. Madison continues and says, it is not a just government, nor is the property secure under it, where a property which a man has in his personal safety and personal liberty is violated by arbitrary seizures of one class of citizens for the service of the rest. He actually calls this absolute despotism. Isn't it arbitrary to say that Walmart and Costco can stay open, but mom and pop have to close? Or that the grocery store and the, the liquor store and whatever can stay open, but your churches have to close? Or your schools have to close? Or the movie theaters have to close? I mean, the very designation by someone in government that some businesses are essential but others are not is the basis of arbitrary and capricious. Because I'm pretty sure if you asked those people whose businesses were closed, they would tell you that it's essential that they keep their businesses open so they can live, so that they can feed their families. And when you're telling people they have to close their business because someone is afraid they might get sick in the business, that is a seizure of one property to serve another. If we just thought about our lives from a rights perspective, we wouldn't even have to have a study on our Constitution. But what we must understand is that our constitutions are built on these fundamental rights. So let's start getting into the Florida Constitution. Since we are here in Florida. Now, I do this all over the country. I've done this in California and Oregon and Missouri and Kansas, and I can't even count anymore. We've gone through all these state constitutions. So I know the best state constitutions and the worst. Florida's not on the top 10, but it's not too bad in of itself. I want to show you every state constitution begins with either a Declaration of Rights or a Bill of Rights that mirrors our US Bill of Rights. I want to tell you that because we have this propensity in society today that whenever anything goes wrong in politics, we run to the federal government to fix our problems. That's not how our constitutional republic was designed. Our constitutional republic is designed so that the majority, and I mean like 95% of your problems, are all solved state and local. The President of the United States is not the ultimate law enforcer, nor is he the savior. Everything that is supposed to happen that directly touches your life is supposed to happen at the state and local level. Florida is no different. Our Constitution begins with Article 1 on a Declaration of Rights. Article 1, Section 1, look at this. Remember, it's all about the rights of the people. And in Florida, all power in government is derived from the people. Which means, isn't that the reaffirmation of what we said in the Declaration of Independence? That governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power from the consent of the governed. We are reestablishing Article 1, Section 1, Florida Constitution, that all government power is derived from the people and only just power comes through consent. So let's look at the Florida Oath of Office, because it's really important that we know what the people we elect promise to us, because that's what an oath is. It is a promise. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support, protect, and defend the Constitution and the government of the United States and of the state of Florida. Now, grammatically speaking, what you're saying is, I will support the Constitution and the government of the United States. I will support the Constitution and the government of the state of Florida. But I want you to understand, there's a supremacy here. The Constitution is first. The government is second. Why? Because the government is derived from the Constitution. The government is inferior to the Constitution, which means by oath, if the government does something contrary to the Constitution, the obligation is to enforce the Constitution, not to support the government. You see how that works? So Article 1, Section 2, Basic Rights. All natural persons, female and alike, are equal before the law. Let that one settle in for just a second. Equal, all natural persons, female and male alike, are equal before the law and have inalienable rights. Now this is beautiful, because in many places our state constitutions are actually better in their Bill of Rights than our US Constitution, because they're more specific to our rights. This is one of those places. So among which are the right to enjoy and defend life, right? Individual inalienable right to enjoy and defend life and liberty, to pursue happiness, to be rewarded for industry, and to acquire, protect, possess, and protect property. Our Florida Constitution says in Article 1, Section 2, that we have an inherent and inalienable right to protect our own property, no matter who tries to take it from us. Now let's look at that, because this is important. It starts off all natural persons. Anybody know what the distinction is between natural and unnatural? Yes.
Is it like the same between like illegal, like queer, unnatural, like illegal?
No, it's actually a difference between people and corporations. right? Because in the law, corporations are identified as persons, but for the purpose of engaging in legal activity. But a corporation is not a natural person. We are natural people. And look at what this says. All natural persons are equal before the law. When the corporation of Walmart can keep their business open, and the corporation of Costco can keep their business open, but the businesses owned by the natural persons, mom and pop, the little bitty businesses, have to shut down. That is, can you see, a violation of Article 1, Section 2. You are depriving them of their property, which is their inherent right to be equal under the law. How are they equal under the law when one can stay open but the other has to close? It should be declared that all businesses are equally essential because it's about the rights of the people. Article 1, Section 3. There shall be no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting or penalizing the free exercise thereof. Freedom of religion, just like in the U.S. Constitution, but the Florida Constitution has, or the Florida law has a Florida Religious Freedom Restoration Act. I call it Religious Freedom 2.0. It is a greater protection than what our Bill of Rights offers, and it makes it more clear. Let me show you what this is. The government shall not. Anybody know what that means, shall not? It means it's completely forbidden. Shall not substantially burden a person's exercise of religion, even if the burden results from a rule of general applicability. That's that rule that says, hey, I'm imposing this on a secular building just the same as I'm imposing it on the church. This Religious Freedom Act, Restoration Act says, even if it's equally applied, you cannot substantially burden a church or someone's religious beliefs unless, number one, it is in furtherance of a compelling governmental interest, and this is the big one, because people in government are always going to have a good excuse, right? That's what that means, compelling governmental interest. We have provided you, we think, with a good enough excuse to deprive you of your rights. That's how that is interpreted, right? So not just simply that, but, and, in conjunction with, it is the least, it must be the least restrictive means of furthering that compelling governmental interest. Least restrictive means. How can shutting down Walmart or leaving Walmart and Costco open, but then telling our churches they have to shut down, giving greater latitude for attendance, greater latitude for interaction at Walmart and Costco than they can have at the church? Doesn't the very existence and operation of Walmart and Costco in the means and manner in which they operate, hundreds and hundreds of people flowing through there every single day, does that not prove that restricting our churches cannot be the least restrictive means necessary? If we are imposing stricter rules on our churches than we are on these big stores, big businesses, then that's the very proof that we are not operating under the least restrictive means necessary. Article 1, Section 5. I kind of like this, the way we have this in the Florida Constitution, better than I like the US Constitution, because it puts these two rights together in a single section. It says, the people shall have the right to peaceably assemble, to instruct their representatives, and to petition for a redress of grievances. See, that's just simply stating in one place what our founders knew, that the act of peaceably assembling is the most powerful tool to control government. When you peacefully and publicly assemble, you show those in government that by your actions, which are more powerful than your words, that you are not happy with what they're doing, that you have a different course of action from what they're doing, that you're not alone in your grievances, and they have to remember that all their power comes from you. But when the government can tell you it's against the law to assemble in groups more than 10 or even at all, they're obviously violating this inalienable right to peaceably assemble. But they're also denying you the most powerful means to complain and demand correction of your government. So let's think about it. If I'm somebody in government and I know I'm about to pass a series of laws that are going to violate your rights, that I know I'm about to do some things for quite a long time that are going to make you very, very unhappy, wouldn't I want to create an excuse, a law, a reason to deny you your right to assemble? Because when we do, when governments engage in the denial of the right to peacefully assemble, it's not just simply a denial of coming out in public. It's an isolation. When people can't gather, they start to think, maybe I'm the only one that thinks the way I do. Maybe nobody else agrees with me. Maybe I should just be quiet and say nothing at all. And then those in government who need to be held accountable are never held accountable because the media never sees the people gather. The people never see each other gather. They never get to see, hey, I am not alone. There is a whole lot of people out there who believe just like I do. Hey, I'm right. This is wrong. We need to work together and stop this. Benjamin Franklin wrote in 1722 that the most powerful tool is the freedom of speech and public assembly, and it is only a traitorous government that would want to stop that. Because if you're alone, what do you fight for? You don't even have the courage to fight, and they know that. It's not about your health. It's about power and control. Because there are ways to gather safely, especially outside in the open air. Let me just say to you this. This is not a protest, by the way. This is not a protest. This is not a protest. This is not a protest. This is a crime. Looting, destroying, burning, robbing are not protests conducted by protesters. They are criminals violating the law. And this is something we need to really grasp because the media is going out of their way to conflate these terms. How many of you heard this? The violent protesters did this today. How many of you heard that from the media? Can I tell you there is no such thing as a violent protester? If you are violent, you are a criminal. You are not a protester. What would be the purpose of conflating these terms? To sow confusion in the minds of the people and chaos in society. Why would media want that? Because they profit from it. I know I see some people in the audience that are a little bit older than the high school, straight out of high school, college students. So I don't know how many of you know this. How many of you heard this? If it leads, it bleeds. If it bleeds, it leads. That's journalism rule number one. What does that mean? Sensationalism sells. Tragedy sells. Chaos sells. How do we make more money? How do we sell more ads? We support and report chaos. Why do we talk about violent protesters? So that people will not know how to deal with criminals and will allow them to engage in destruction and theft. And the people are like, I don't know, man, what is that? I heard Greta Van Susteren back in 2016. President Donald Trump was not president at the time. He was having a rally, I think it was in Chicago. And outside the stadium that they had rented to do this, there was this big disruption. People jumping on cars and punching people in the face and destroying property. And Greta Van Susteren on Fox News, who is a lawyer, it's like seared in my brain because it was one of those moments where you just wanted to beat your head on the table, right? Greta Van Susteren says, you know, this really is a difficult situation for our law enforcement officers because after all, these people, referring to the ones that were punching people in the face and destroying vehicles, these people have a right to protest. And what do you do if you're a law enforcement officer? How do you weigh these rights? I'm sorry, you do not have a right to punch someone in the face. You do not have a right to destroy someone's vehicle in these situations. You do not have that right. There should be no confusion. For someone who is trained in law enforcement, a peaceful protester is a guy holding a sign. Maybe he's angry. Maybe he's yelling. But one minute he puts down the sign and punches somebody in the face, that oath, that badge that you took says you arrest that guy because he's not a protester anymore. He's a criminal. I don't understand what the confusion might be there. What about these stay-at-home orders? How about if we look at a couple law cases, a couple court cases to give us some direction on stay-at-home orders? This is actually an older Supreme Court case where in a 5-4 decision, the court held that the right to travel is an inherent element of liberty that cannot be denied to American citizens. How do you get more powerful language than that? Here's another one that I really enjoy. The right to move freely about one's neighborhood or town, even by automobile, is indeed implicit in the concept of ordered liberty and deeply rooted in the nation's history. This next one's actually my favorite because I like snark. Anybody like snarky? I love good writing. And we get every once in a while a good judge that does this. This is from 1989. The right to walk the streets or to meet publicly with one's friends for a noble purpose or for no purpose at all, and to do whatsoever one pleases, is an integral component of life in a free and ordered society. Do you know what these stay-at-home orders prove about American society? Wherever you are on a stay-at-home order, where you are ordered by government to be locked down in your home, you no longer live in a free and ordered society. You are living in the opposite of that. By the way, let me just give you one of my law professors. Since I'm on UF campus, I don't think he's teaching anymore, but Joseph Little was my absolute favorite law professor of all my years. Great guy. He used to say, this is a bonus for your educational dollar. Quarantine has a medical definition. It is the isolation of sick and infected people. If you are not sick or infected, you are not quarantining. You are on house arrest. And house arrest without due process is just one more example of unjust government. Due process. No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. If you are told to stay home and you don't get a trial by a jury of your peers, you are being denied your due process. How many of you are familiar with the Fourth Amendment? in the U.S. Constitution. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. Well, we've got that here in Florida too. It's section 12. This one is even better. Now, I want you to listen very closely because an element in this particular section is going to come up in just a few minutes. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures and against unreasonable interception of private communications by any means shall not be violated. You're not just secure in your person's, houses, papers, and effects. We go an extra mile in Florida to say even your cell phone is secure unless there is a warrant based upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, particularly describing the place to be searched or the persons or things to be seized. The language is so tight, there ought to be no question. But lawyers wouldn't make money if we couldn't question words, right? That's why it's so important that we know our rights. Because our property is being seized and we don't even realize it. Article 10, Section 6, eminent domain. No private property shall be taken except for public purpose and with what? Full compensation thereof paid to each owner or secured by deposit in the registry of the court and available to the owner. Can we just think about this for 1 second? The government telling you you have to shut down your business ought to be, without question in our minds, the government taking our business. That is a government taking of our property. And our Florida Constitution, Article 10, Section 6 says that cannot happen unless the government pays you first. Or they put a deposit for that amount in the court that you can get to. How many of our businesses in the state of Florida have been compensated for all their downtime? And don't tell me about some stimulus check coming from the federal government, because this is not telling the federal government to give you $1,200 to shut your business for 6 months. This is a constitutional requirement on the state of Florida. Now, what's interesting, I gave this class somewhere else in the state of Florida, and there was a legislator in the audience, and he was not happy that I was pointing this out. And he came up to me afterwards and said, KrisAnne, you're a lawyer. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. I said, oh, really? Do tell. He said, you are misleading these people in the eminent domain clause. The government is not taking their business, and you know it. They're just temporarily shutting it down. I said, oh, that's really interesting. So what you're telling me is if they take the business temporarily, it's not really a taking then. If they promise to give it back to them in some time, then it's not a taking. He said, that's right, KrisAnne, and you know it. I said, you know, I'm really glad that you explained that to me, because I want you to tell me where you live. He said, what do you mean, where I live? I said, just what's your address? He says, why do you need to know my address? I said, you know, because I'm in an emergency situation right now, and I really need a vehicle. And I know you have one at your house. So I'm going to come to your house, and I'm going to take your vehicle. But don't worry, I'm going to give it back to you. It's only temporary. Now, by your definition, I'm promising to give it back to you. I'm only going to have it temporarily because I'm in an emergency, and I really need it. And since I'm promising to give it back to you, you can't accuse me of stealing it, because the number one element of stealing is taking. So I'm not taking because I'm promising to give it back to you later. He said, well, that's not what I mean, and you know it. I said, well, you just told me that, so how does that work? And he turned around and stormed out. You see, because even when you stop and think about it, it's a taking. You can call it temporary, but if the people don't know when it's coming back, it it's permanent. And for some people, the term temporary has become permanent. Why? Because Article 10, Section 6 has not been fulfilled. They've not received a dime. I mean, look at us. We are absolutely already identified at least 5 violations of our Florida Constitution already. In the closing of our businesses, the violation of our rights to freely move, the restrictions on our churches, the right, a 1994 case, the right to hold specific private employment and to follow chosen profession free from unreasonable governmental interference comes within both the liberty and property concepts of the 5th and 14th Amendments. And it also comes within the concepts of life, liberty, and property in at least 5 sections in the Florida Constitution. No administrative agency except the Department of Military Affairs in appropriately convened court-martial action as provided by law shall impose a sentence or imprisonment, nor shall it impose any other penalty except as provided by law. Your health department can't charge you with a misdemeanor for not wearing a mask. Your health department cannot charge you with a misdemeanor for not following health department rules, because Article 1, Section 18 says they are prohibited. No bureaucrats creating criminal law. Now, what about contact tracing? Now, I live in Tampa, Florida, and I followed all of our Board of County Commissioner meetings from the very time they first started. I was online with them. I know how contact tracing takes place in the state of Florida and probably how it takes place all over the country. Contact tracing number 1, geo-tracking your cell phone. The Supreme Court of the United States, a new Supreme Court of the United States, said in Carpenter v. U.S. that the third-party doctrine fails and that the government cannot seize your cell phone records, your geolocation of your cell phone records, without a warrant. This is specifically dealing with the government getting a ping from your cell phone from a third party. See, the government tried to say we don't have to have a warrant because we didn't get this stuff from Mr. Carpenter's cell phone. We got this stuff from a third party. So we didn't have to issue Mr. Carpenter a warrant. We just had to ask the cell phone providers to voluntarily give it to us. And the Supreme Court said, no, in this application, we reject the third party doctrine. You must have a warrant. So when our police department, our health department, any government agency goes to the hospital and says, give me the tracking data from this person, this is unconstitutional. And we ought to know that they have to have a warrant or they must get your permission. See, once you give your permission, they don't need a warrant anymore. You know how they get your permission? Whenever you take a COVID test, the document that you sign waives your right to a warrant, and you give them permission to geo-track you on your cell phone. No, read what you sign. It's not just for lawyers. You're signing away your rights. The contact tracing method number 2, infrared technology. We actually have drones. I learned this by listening to a Hillsborough County Board of County Commissioner meeting. We have drones that fly over buildings with infrared cameras that can identify how many people are in a building and where they're standing. I mean, they look like little red, cones or columns, and they can tell how many people and where they're standing and all that. So they fly the drones around, or some officer comes with an infrared camera, shines it into your business or to your home, and they see how many, oh, those people have too many people in there. They're standing too closely together. We better send an agent in. The Supreme Court in Kylo v. U.S. says they must have a warrant for every person unless they have permission. How many of you know that in 1992, Florida legislatures and the governor signed into law a statute that says the state health officer can force vaccinate anybody in Florida using whatever means is necessary. No religious exemptions, no medical exemptions, no conscience exemptions. It says right there in section 4B, if the individual poses a danger to the public health, the state health officer, elected by no one, by the way, may subject the individual to isolation or quarantine if there is no practical method, which is subjective, right, to be determined by the state health officer elected by no one. If there is no practical method to isolate or quarantine the individual, the state health officer may use any means necessary to vaccinate or treat the individual. Our Florida statute that gives religious exemptions to vaccinations is completely null and void. So how do we go about fixing this, right? How do we know what's going on? Well, let's look at a couple more sections in our Florida Constitution before we wrap up here today. James Madison said there can be no liberty where the legislative and executive powers are united in the same person or body of magistrates. That's where we get our provision of separation of powers. Our Florida Constitution in Article 2, Section 3 says, the power of the state government shall be divided into a legislative, executive, and judicial branches, and no person belonging to one branch shall exercise any powers appertaining to either of the other branches unless specifically provided, expressly provided herein. Well, the legislative branch is the one that makes the laws. This tells us only the legislative branch can make laws. The executive branch is the one who execute laws. So when you have an executive who is issuing orders expecting them to be applied as law, then you have a violation of Article 2, Section 3, because the governor does not have the authority to issue laws. The governor only has the authority to execute laws, and an executive order with the force of law is completely and totally unconstitutional. Look at what this court in Pennsylvania just recently said. The solution to the national crisis can never be permitted to supersede the commitment to individual liberty that stands as the foundation of the American experiment. The Constitution cannot accept the concept of a new normal, where the basic liberties of the people can be subordinated to an open-ended emergency mitigation measures. This is a brand new case. This is Alexander Hamilton. No legislative act, therefore, contrary to the Constitution can be valid. Do you know what question the Pennsylvania Supreme Court says, and Alexander Hamilton answers? I get this everywhere I go. Well, KrisAnne, what about the Emergency Powers Act? Well, guess what? There is no authority delegated to the legislative branch to increase the power, expand the power of the governor. It does not exist. If you want to expand the power of the governor, you have to amend the Constitution. James Wilson says, the power of the Constitution predominates, and anything, therefore, that shall be enacted by Congress contrary thereto will not have the force of law. So what is our solution? Our solution is very simple. Number one, understanding the exercise of undelegated authority is not only null and void, it is unjust without our consent. The solution is peaceful non-compliance. Peaceful non-compliance is not the same as civil disobedience. Peaceful non-compliance is when we are enforcing the law and the Constitution because those in government are not following the Constitution. You see, civil disobedience implies that we are being disobedient. But remember, if a law is not made consistent with the Constitution, it is no law at all. It is a violation of that trust, a violation of our consent, and a violation of our written Constitution. So peaceful non-compliance, simply saying, I will not comply, we will not comply, is not us breaking the law. It's us enforcing the supreme law of the land. Guess who is our biggest help in that? The sheriff. Your sheriff is not a hireling of the state. He is not a hireling of the county. Your sheriff is a constitutionally elected representative of the people whose oath is to the Constitution, not to enforcing the law. It is absolutely the duty of your sheriff as an elected representative of the people pursuant to the Constitution of the state of Florida to say, I will not enforce that law because it is contrary to our Constitution. Just like these 33 New Mexico sheriffs said when we will not enforce red flag laws. We will not enforce red flag laws because they are unlawful taking of the people's property. They are a denial of due process. They are a denial of our right to keep and bear arms. They turn the American standard of innocent until proven guilty completely on its head, and we will not enforce that. Not only that, Chavez County, New Mexico, Sheriff Mike Harrington, refusing to enforce New Mexico shutdown orders for COVID back in May. He wrote this open letter to the governor of New Mexico and said, as a constitutional officer, it's my duty and obligation to defend the rights of the people and the Constitution of the state of New Mexico. And it's my duty to tell the governor, no, you're not a monarch. You're a servant of the people. Because the bottom line is when the sheriff's office doesn't do their job, then you have stuff like this. You have Shelley Luther, business owner, saying, I will not comply. She has to get arrested because her sheriff doesn't know his duty or her duty is to defend that business and keep it open and not to have her arrested. Or then you get the people, the New Jersey business gym owners who get arrested because their sheriff doesn't know their job. Now, I want to point out to you, these people are standing for what they believe is right. They are standing for their rights. They're standing for their Constitution. They're standing for the rights of the future of America. And they're saying, consequences be as they will, we will not proceed. We will continue to keep our businesses open because it matters how we stand. How many of you thought we could actually live in a state in America where a pastor would be arrested for having church? Sheriff Chad Chronister of Hillsborough County, Florida, is the example of a sheriff who is not a constitutional sheriff. He stood at a press conference and said, by having church, the pastor forced me to arrest him. Are you kidding me? In America? Come on. Do you think that's what these people signed the Declaration of Independence actually meant? Is that the America they envisioned? I'll show you one more Supreme Court case, and then we're done. 1934. The Constitution was adopted in a period of grave emergency. Its grants of power to the federal government and its limitations of power of the states were determined in light of emergency, and they are not altered by emergency. There is no greater crisis than we experienced at the time we were ratifying the constitutions. As we were ratifying the constitutions in the greatest moment of crisis in this country, we created limited separation of powers. We delegated limited power to the executive, limited power to the legislative branch, and expressly told them that their job was to secure our rights, not to regulate or control them. That's why it is absolutely essential that we engage in peaceful non-compliance. This is the right now. Sue, right? Texas is suing Pennsylvania. People are suing within the states. Business owners are suing governors. Sue. But the judicial wheels turn very, very slowly. And your business will not survive if you are waiting for a lawsuit. Our founders created our constitutional republic where all power is inherent in us. We hold it. It's ours, which means it's our responsibility to stand for what is ours now. That's the right now solution. Unity in community in the name of liberty. Right now saves your business. Right now saves your church. Right now saves who you are. Because remember, it's about natural rights. And Samuel Adams said, no people will tamely surrender their liberties nor be easily subdued when knowledge is diffused and virtue is preserved. He said, on the contrary, when the people are universally ignorant and debauched in their manners, they will sink underneath their own weight without the aid of foreign invaders. And if we're honest, we have lost more liberty in the last 6 months than we have in the last 60 years from any foreign invader. How many of you learned something this evening? How many of you feel a little bit more empowered by what you learned? We've got to share this with other people, don't we? This is important stuff. Let me show you. We have a documentary that's coming out. It's a documentary. The movie is called Non-Compliant. It's going to teach America, all over America, what I just taught you just now. Why we have a right to stand, why we need to stand, but more importantly, how are we successful in that stand? And so I want to play for you our first movie trailer. I'm pretty excited about this. Here we go. This is going to work, right? Okay. We hold these truths to be self-evident. That all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. We have a power. And we raised a spoiled, brat representative government that needs to be taken to the woodshed. Are you satisfied with the government that owns you? There are churches who refuse to allow us to use their facilities to teach.
Unspoken or even sometimes spoken rule that religion and politics don't mix. You wouldn't dare speak out against the government or somehow resist.
Christians have to be involved in politics. God commands it.
Every turn of event through history hinged
One person will stand up,
upon a single person.
and then everybody else will stand.
A gym member, surrounded by a crowd of supporters, was placed in handcuffs.
A Tampa Bay pastor has been arrested, sentenced to a week in
She
jail.
also
tore up a cease and desist letter.
We have a posterity waiting for us to say, we will not comply, so you will be free. They have a chance to fight without bloodshed. But every time we comply, we establish a future where our children will not have that option.
While you sit down, all should be standing. While you back down.
What do you guys think?
It's awesome.
Pretty cool? Like, ah. So if you would do me a favor tonight, go to noncompliantmovie.com, sign up to get the, we're going to be releasing 3 more trailers before January. We're going to try, our goal is to release this on, in January of 2021, the full documentary that will teach America the right to peacefully assemble, the right to secure their property in the face of government overreach. We also have our online Constitution training at libertyfirstuniversity.com. And we have on the table a couple DVDs that will, if you were interested in learning some more, I don't know how many has DVDs players anymore, but we also have them available at libertyfirstuniversity.com as downloads. We have dozens and dozens of classes online. The power of the president, the power of the purse, how is the judiciary established, how was our Constitution written? I have a class on the history of the Constitution. I take you back to the year 1014. I show you 5 documents that were written over a period of 700 years that became our 3 foundational documents: the right to keep and bear arms. A great class called One America Disarmed, how one governor in 1774 tried to disarm one town, and it sparked the shot that was heard from around the world. So we have all of these things for you. Remember, we also have our podcast 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. Straight up, hardcore liberty. Nothing more, nothing less, nothing else. So I just want to ask you one more time. Did you enjoy what you learned? Okay, so take it out there and share it. That's what I ask. We're on Facebook, we're on YouTube, we're on Twitch. I am not on Twitter. I've been Twitter banned since August. By the way, Twitter never told me why they kicked me off. I'm just suspended. I tried to appeal and they said, I'm sorry, your appeal is denied. We've just decided it's so, and we're not going to tell you why. So here we are. Maybe the Constitution's just way too much. But all of the things you can find me, I'm on LinkedIn, Parler, I'm on Parler. All you have to do is search my name, KrisAnne Hall. Everything is branded that way, easy to find. So if you have iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, well, we're not on SoundCloud anymore, I don't think. Google Music Play, all of these avenues to get our podcast delivered right to you. So do we have a few minutes for Q&A? Does anybody, kind of like drinking from a water hose, right? You guys had a lot to consume, but everything that I gave you, you can find online, because all I did was copy the Florida Constitution and show it to you. I mean, we're not learning this stuff. How many of you think we should be learning this stuff? This is important. So given what we learned, or maybe current event today, got any questions? Yes.
Kind of like a 2-part question.
Okay. I will try to give you a 2-part answer.
Okay. So I don't know if you, back in 2019, February, Kris Pratt, I guess went to church, and him and his church were called homophobes, which is going against our First Amendment right, freedom of religion. And then the second part is Ellen Page. I don't know if you know her, the actress from Juno, who is now a man now. Going into the Article 2, where it says all natural male and females, you know, are like, one, is that going, are we going to have to change our constitution, the state constitution? And 2, why is it that, you know, one side is being preferred by the other, and then, you know, but we can't practice this? And so is that just going to disenfranchise or blow us to not say anything?
I'll answer the second question first.
Okay.
The Florida Constitution doesn't have to be changed because remember the terminology natural persons is not that distinction. The term natural persons is a distinction between people and corporations. So if you're not a corporation, you're not natural. Or if you're not a corporation, you're a natural person, right? That distinction. Now, the first question, who was actually doing the name calling?
It was the transgender person, and she was being applauded, or I don't know what to call. He applauded and appraised because they were calling, that religion, that person, homophobes. It was the Hillsong Church too, by the way.
Right.
So.
Well, let's remember something really important. When we're talking about a violation of our rights, there has to be an element of government involved. So private citizens can call each other names. Private people can cast stones and, hate on each other. That's part of free speech. Now, you can't go punch somebody in the face. That's a crime. But, as long as you're not engaging in slander or libel, which is a civil tort, then you can call people names. The problem becomes when you have someone who's been elected to office or some government agency that does that. To have a violation of rights, you have to have a government actor. So that's how that works. Yes, ma'am. It's not a constitution, it's a statute created by the Florida legislature, and yes, it's still there. However, we have a U.S. House Rep. His name is Anthony Sabatini. If you're not following Anthony Sabatini on social media, you need to. Anthony is hardcore, man. And he has put forward a piece of legislation to repeal that law because obviously, you know what, I'm not going to be forced vaccinated. My husband says it's a good thing they told him they could use whatever means necessary, because if they want to vaccinate me by force, they're going to need whatever means is necessary. Yes. Well, I think what we need to do, again, it involves education. Remember, Samuel Adams said, no people will tamely surrender their liberties nor be easily subdued when knowledge is diffused and virtue is preserved. How many of you is the first time you've heard about that statute, forced vaccination statute? Yeah, see? So step number one, let people know that it's there. I think the very existence of that statute is enough to make people mad and want to do something about it. And then once you let them know that it's there, I think it's really fortunate that Anthony Sabatini is already working on that, right? So you get people, we're trying to get people to get behind Anthony Sabatini, to get the awareness out there that this is a necessary thing, and we start doing this. But in the meantime, what we need to do is we need to make sure that our sheriffs, remember, the sheriff's duty is to protect your rights, not to enforce the law. So you need a sheriff who is willing to defend you against the state health officer, a sheriff that will say no. You need a county commission, a city council that will refuse to allow the state health officer to do this. And the governor, by the way, the governor could issue a regulation on the state health officer because the state health officer falls under the executive branch. So the governor could tell the state health officer, as an agent of the executive branch, you will not force vaccinate COVID vaccinations. So there's a number of things that we can do, but it first has to begin with education, and it has to begin with us having the courage to say we will not comply. Yes.
How that law even came to be? When it came to be that?
In 1992, I'm not sure.
That sounds kind of like a sort of out there thing to just put that into.
It does, doesn't it?
You know, where did that come from?
Maybe it came from some hurricane. I don't know. You were living here. This is my husband back there in the corner. You were living here in 1992. What were the politics in Florida in 1992 that made what is it, Governor Bush, probably, right?
Yeah, I think it. So the intent, I believe, if I recall, just surrounded, specific sort of emergency situations, but the danger is now, as we all know, the precedent and how that can be broadened out. But I don't know the specific details. I know, again, the governor, as long as we have Governor DeSantis at the moment, he reiterates again that there will be no forced vaccinations in the state of Florida. But obviously, the problem with that is Governor DeSantis will be the governor.
Any other questions? Sure.
Just your thoughts on like, so us being the constitutional republic, we are. What are your thoughts on people like Governor Cuomo or Governor Newsom and mandating that you can't walk in the streets of your neighborhood, ride your bicycle, or like even meet up with your mother, stuff like that?
Well, remember what we learned today. It's not in these local situations. It's not so much the U.S. Constitution, but the state constitution. Well, I've actually taught this class in California. I've taught this class to New Yorkers. So I've studied the New York Constitution and the California Constitution as well. And believe it or not, the California Constitution is even better than the Florida Constitution. So Governor Newsom is blatantly and boldly violating so many aspects of the California Constitution that it's not even funny. But what we have to do, and that was the purpose of our movie, right, is to cast a really broad net and wake people up to their authority to say no. I mean, it's not just simply, here's what I see as I travel the country. People feel like this is wrong, right? How many of you feel like what's happening is wrong? You even on a certain intellectual level know it, but without actually getting the class like we had here today, the feeling and the knowing is not enough to make you say no. Now, what's happening is some people are getting so desperate, right, that they're losing everything. I mean, people have built businesses for generations that are being forced to close. They're losing everything. And that desperation is making them do what they feel is right. But how much bolder would we be if we had a foundation of fact, not just simply feel we're right, but to know we're right? And so this is what's happening. We're still traveling all over the country. As a matter of fact, we're going to California this month. Is it this month or January? No, it's January. January 15, 16, 17, we'll be in California teaching this in California again. It's like the third time. Yes, sir.
You say there's maybe a bigger danger of losing sight of the big picture. So we sort of fixate on the mask, curfew, but the real big problem is the shift in all of these decisions being made by executives and bureaucracy rather than the legislative body that is supposed to happen.
Right. And let me just be clear. I'm not against people wearing masks. You may choose to wear a mask if you feel your health requires it. Choose to wear a mask if it just makes you feel better. But I cannot support government forcing people to wear masks. Government forcing, stay home if it makes you feel better. Stay home if you're a high-risk health person. Get your groceries delivered. Do what you have to do. But for the government to force us to do this, for the government, like I said, to arbitrarily, this corporation can stay open, but mom and pop have to close. These are the issues that we must oppose. And we can't get distracted in the federal message either, because it's incumbent upon our Constitution at the state level to be the mechanism by which we operate in state and local government. We can't be looking at a president to fix us. We can't be looking at the U.S. Congress to fix us, because every time we do that, we expand their power. And how dangerous is it to have such expansive power in a federal government when you have no idea who might just be in charge of it in 4 or 5 years, right? You have no idea who's going to be in charge of it in the next year and a half. So we have to maintain the limits of government in the Constitution. We have to. So if you have no more questions, I'm gonna say one more thing. No president has ever been elected in November in America. It has never, ever happened. Why? Because no president is ever elected by popular vote. The president is elected by the Electoral College. Their vote takes place in the middle of December.
By law, that vote is counted on January 6th. That is a deadline. It is a hard, fast law. The electors' votes are either to the Senate president on January 6th or they are not counted. 4 times in our history, electoral college votes were not counted. You don't lose an election because you don't have all the electors. You choose a president from the majority of the electors that present on January 6th. It is irresponsible and inaccurate and purely speculation to declare someone a president before January 6th. And I don't care if it's a Republican you declare or a Democrat you declare. It is irresponsible, unconstitutional, and again, and contrary to law to declare anyone a president before January 6th. And this year, more than anything, there are so many variables that could come into play before January 6th. Joe Biden, there is no such thing as president-elect. There's no office. At this point in time, until January 20th comes, Joe Biden is simply former vice president. How do you give national security information to a person who doesn't even have a job in the federal government? Well, thank you, Turning Point, University of Florida, Go Gators, for bringing me in here today. You guys have been great. So hungry for what we've got here, and I want to thank you. Don't forget, you promised me you were going to go to noncompliantmovie.com, share. Promise me you'll share it with at least 5 people tonight. Can you do that? It won't cost you a dime to do it, promise. God bless you guys. Thank you so much.